The first time Ella May stepped into the ranch kitchen, the floor creaked louder than the boots of the men who passed through the door each day. No one looked twice at her, not really, just another widow in worn shoes with calloused hands and a tin kettle that didn't whistle anymore. She stirred stew-baked cornbread packed tin plates for cowboys who never said thank you. And still she smiled, quietly, like someone who'd forgotten what it meant to be seen, but kept showing up anyway. What Ella May didn't know, what no one told her, was that one of those men sitting at the long pine table, dust-covered and silent, owned every acre beneath her feet. And he watched her, not in the way other men had, not with hunger or pity, but with stillness, with memory, because once years ago she'd handed him bread at a town barn dance, and he'd never forgotten the way she folded the cloth around it, gentle like it mattered. But now she didn't remember him. Or if she did, she never said. And he never spoke of it, not even when he saw her sewing her apron with twine, not even when he noticed her fingers trembling from the cold before dawn, not even when he began fixing the back door quietly each morning, one hinge at a time. She just cooked, and he just stayed. But something was changing. A pot left warm for longer. A mug set beside his hand without asking. A chair pulled out in silence. Until one evening, as thunder rolled far beyond the ridge, he did something that shifted everything. He spoke her name, and she froze, not from fear, not from shame, but from remembering. What had he seen in her all this time? And what happens when a woman who's lost everything is finally given a place to stay? You might have missed what passed between them in silence, but if you stay, if you listen close, you'll feel it. The kitchen behind the bunkhouse didn't have walls thick enough to hold in the smell of onion or sorrow. Every morning at 4:30, Ella May tied up her braid with the same blue ribbon she'd kept since girlhood and stepped barefoot onto the stone floor. Her shoes had long since worn thin. The mornings in early spring were still bitter, and the stove took its time catching flame, especially with wood damp from a lazy winter. She didn't complain. She never had. Not when the river took her brother. Not when the last of her folks were buried under cedar. Not when her husband left her with nothing but a name in a sour memory. The ranchers called her Miss May, though most didn't look her in the eye when they did. She was just the cook, brown-skinned, soft-voiced, and as steady as a clock no one wound anymore. Some men tipped their hats, others didn't. Some muttered that she stirred too slow or salted too little. She answered only with quiet biscuits, beans that didn't burn, and coffee that never scalded. Nobody asked where she slept. Nobody noticed that she took her meals standing, or that she always saved the broken bread crusts in a cloth at her side. There was one cowboy, though, wore a brim pulled low, said little ate last. He never looked at her like a servant, just nodded like she was something familiar. Once when she dropped a pan, he bent to help. Their hands touched the same handle. He didn't flinch. She still didn't know his name. That night after the supper was scraped clean and the dishes rinsed, she stepped out into the yard. The sky was silvering toward dusk. A wind passed, and for a moment she thought she heard her name spoken soft like someone remembering something they'd been too scared to miss. But when she turned, no one was there. Only the bunkhouse windows glowing warm, and the cowboy's horse still unsaddled. She was just the cook. So why did the man who owned the land start showing up early and staying late? The first time Ella May found him standing by the stove after the men had gone, she almost dropped the pot she was lifting. He didn't speak right away, just took off his hat and looked at the iron kettle like it held something more than beans. "Fire's almost out," she said, cautious. Her voice wasn't sharp, but it carried the kind of tired that comes from knowing when not to ask too much. "I know," he said, then added, "I like how you keep it anyway." She blinked, unsure what to do with that. Compliments were things given with flattery, or aim rarely with stillness. He didn't move to warm his hands, didn't shift his weight like he was waiting for something more. "You here for seconds?" she asked gently, half a smile on her face, but not yet in her eyes. He shook his head. "No, ma'am. I just hadn't said thank you." To her surprise, he picked up a dry towel and began drying the tin plates she had stacked. They worked in silence. Not uncomfortable, just plain, like two people standing beside the same winter window, not needing to speak to feel the cold together. When he left, he said, You cook like you're making something steady. She didn't know what he meant, not fully. But that night, she laid her ribbon on the nightstand instead of tying it around the doorknob like she always did when she feared being startled awake. The next morning, he was already at the table before the biscuits finished baking. She offered him the first one hot from the pan. He ate it slowly, looking out the window, and said, "My name's Clayton." She didn't tell him hers yet, but her smile reached her eyes this time. He never said what he did on the ranch. But why did he keep watching her hands like he remembered them? The spring wind returned, carrying the scent of cut hay and dry pine. Ella May rose early, kneaded dough with calloused hands, and poured coffee for men who never asked her name. But Clayton, he stayed longer after each meal. He never pried. But he noticed. He noticed the way she hummed while slicing apples, though her voice never matched the tune. He noticed how she flinched, not when someone yelled, but when someone whispered close behind her. And he noticed that her left ring finger still bore the faint white groove of a band long removed. For weeks, she told herself he was just being polite. A quiet ranch hand, maybe lonesome, maybe not. She didn't ask what work he did because something in her feared the answer. Feared knowing why his shirts were always clean as hands unblistered. Why he never lined up for pay on Saturdays like the rest of them. One evening, she found a note on the kitchen table. Folded neat. No name. Your pie reminded me of my mother's. Haven't thought of her in years. The handwriting was firm, a little slanted. She read it twice before tucking it into her apron. She didn't know why she kept it. Maybe because no one else on the ranch ever thanked her. That night, Clayton didn't come by, nor the next day. And for reasons she couldn't explain, not to herself, not to God, she burned the pie. When he returned on the third morning, standing in the same quiet spot by the stove, she didn't speak first. He set a bundle on the table. Inside, a spool of blue ribbon, the same shade as the one she wore in her hair on Sundays, back when she still believed someone would notice. I saw it in town, he said. Didn't mean nothing. Just thought you might like it. She looked down, heart pounding, too loud for the room. But I didn't give it to you, 'cause I want anything, he added. She nodded slowly. Then I'll take it. But what happens when someone who's learned to expect nothing starts to hope for something again? By early June, the days were long, and the silences longer. Ella May moved like clockwork through her kitchen, her hands doing what her heart no longer trusted softening. She found herself looking up when Clayton came through the door. She baked a little more than the Cowboys could eat. She added sugar to the coffee she knew he didn't take sweet, but only for him, and he never corrected her. There was a moment, just one, when he brushed past her too closely at the pantry shelf. His hand lightly touched hers as she reached for the flour sack. Neither spoke, neither pulled away. But the room changed. That same night, as thunder rolled low across the mesa, a stranger arrived at the back porch. His boots were polished, his voice smooth with trouble. Heard there's a woman here who bakes like a preacher's wife and used to wear pearls to bed, he said with a smirk. That you, Ella May? She froze. The man stepped closer. You ran off with a sack of bread and a ring that wasn't yours. Clayton stood up from the corner, quiet as dusk. You'll leave now, he said. And who are you, hired hand? The man sneered. Clayton didn't answer. He just looked at Ella May, and she, trembling, finally said it. He owns the land. The man's smirk faltered. Clayton stepped between them, boots steady on old wood. She's under my roof. My rules. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Ella May felt not owned, not claimed, but shielded. Later, alone in the pantry, she pressed the blue ribbon to her chest and whispered, I didn't steal the ring. He gave it to me, then took everything else. What do you do when the past finds your doorstep before you've had a chance to believe in a future? After the man left, the wind didn't settle. It seemed to pace outside like a coyote watching. Clayton sat on the porch most nights now, gun untouched beside him, more out of promise than threat. And Ella May, though shaken, never stopped baking. The kitchen became her chapel and the old flour tin her confessional. One morning while dusting the top shelf, she knocked the tin from its perch. It spilled across the wood floor, and there, nestled inside, was an envelope worn soft at the edges. It had her name, in his handwriting. She hadn't seen it in years, the loops too smooth, the slant too proud. The letter wasn't long, just 10 sentences about regret. About gold that was never his, a debt he owed to a man named McCullen, and how he'd signed her over like a deed to settle it. He'd meant to leave it for her, the letter said. So you'd understand why I gave you away like a tool I couldn't keep sharp. She didn't cry. Instead, she folded the paper, walked out to the corral, and tossed it into the fire barrel used for branding trash and warming cold hands. She watched it catch, curl, and vanish. Later, Clayton found her on the back porch, staring at the empty bucket she'd once kept beside the hearth. You ever think about leaving, he asked. Every day, she replied, but lately not with the same ache. Some truths burn cleaner than lies. But once the past is ash, what grows in its place? It wasn't the letter that changed her. It was the silence after. The kind of silence that comes when a burden has finally been set down, not because the weight is gone, but because someone else chose to carry it beside you. Ella May returned to her cooking, but now the loaves were warmer, the crusts thicker, like she expected them to be held by hands that didn't disappear after supper. She laughed more. Not loud or often, but enough for the bunkhouse boys to glance sideways, surprised by the sound. One morning she caught Clayton repairing a slat on the north fence. Not hurried, not particularly skilled, just deliberate. She watched from the kitchen window, then stepped outside with 2 mugs of coffee. I used to do that, she said, handing him a cup. Before I thought men didn't stay. He didn't meet her eyes. I was never planning to. But you didn't leave. No, he said quietly. Didn't feel right. You patch enough holes in a fence and pretty soon it starts to feel like yours. A breeze kicked up dust between them, swirling like an old whisper neither of them needed to name. She took off her apron, folded it, and sat down on the steps. They sat like that a long while, not touching, not talking, just letting the wind move around them, as if it had found something it no longer needed to chase. Some repairs aren't made with nails or rope, just presence. Would you stay for what happens next? It wasn't the kind of love you find in books. There were no grand gestures, no vows whispered under moonlight, just a slow accumulation of kindnesses, quiet ones, the kind that built something solid over time. Ella May started sleeping with the window open, not to listen for trouble, but to hear the wind carry Coyote's song and the rustle of leaves brushing the barn roof. She still wore her apron, still cooked for the boys, still rose before dawn. But something had shifted. She left her boots by the front door now, not the back. Her coat hung on the same hook where Clayton once hung his. There was a bowl of fresh herbs by the window, some of them grown from seeds she never thought would sprout in soil this dry. And the door didn't creak anymore, he had fixed it. One evening while folding laundry, she found a note tucked in the sleeve of her blouse. It said only, "This land was mine before, but it wasn't home until you." She didn't cry, though something inside her softened, like bread left to rise in warm sun. That night as the fire dimmed and the boys drifted to their bunks, Ella May sat beside Clayton, each of them nursing a chipped mug of coffee, sharing silence like it was the last light of the day. And she said, not loudly but with certainty, "I think I'll stay if you'll keep making room." He didn't speak, just reached out and folded her apron neatly on the table beside them. Sometimes home isn't a place, it's a presence that stays. As the late season winds rolled across the fields and the fire in Ella May's little kitchen began to warm the old wooden floor, we saw more clearly than ever there were kindnesses that did not need to be spoken. A chair was always pulled out for us to sit on. A window sash was always cleared to let in the light. A quiet simmering on the stove, though no one had touched it all day. Jonas, the man who had never loved anything, also had a lofty dream finally revealing himself when he patched her porch before it rained. And Ella May, the woman who had been forgotten by the whole town, now smiled softly at the young voice of a child, outside a child she had not born but who was called Mama. This story did not end with an explanation or a barbaric wedding. It ends with a simple dinner, a glance exchanged without confirmation, and a clear feeling that everyone deserves a place to return to. If you feel a little warmth in this story, subscribe to the Nun, Wild West Saga channel to join other healing stories. Do you want to see the next part? Or are you looking forward to another story also gentle, also withered, but full of hope? Share your feelings in the comments.